Hi, welcome to this week's edition of PHQ, questions from the personality hacker community. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And Addison, let's get right to our question today.
At what age can you start identifying personality traits? And how early can you define these traits and start helping a child develop those traits positively? Cheers, Aylin.
Thanks, Aylin, for the question. We have a 3-year-old daughter that we would love to know her personality type. And we have some guesses, and we have some thoughts around how you can maybe look at a child and guess some of this. But I think this is a question a lot of parents have, is I have a child, and I'd love to know what their personality type is, because I feel like it would help me raise them better. I feel like it would help me give them meet their needs better, be able to give them activities and things that would appeal to them, their aptitudes. I'd love to know what their type is. So how early can I tell? How early will I know this about my child?
Yeah, and I think it's a noble question to want to know your child's personality type in order to not cater to them, but make sure that you're throwing them in the path of as many positive opportunities as possible. I think it's a very noble pursuit. Unfortunately, it's also something that is difficult to suss out. There's no hard and fast rule on when you can profile a child. Sometimes their personalities become extremely obvious very early on. And with other types, it's a little more subtle, and it takes a while for the personality to really blossom. One of the things that we've noticed is that the primary dominant cognitive function, or what we call the driver process in the CAR model, the driver process shows up pretty early. It is your primary way of engaging with reality from a very early age. And so one thing that is a lot more obvious to determine, at least by the ages of, I would say, 5 to 7, is that dominant cognitive function. Now, you have to have some skill, right, to be able to determine that. You have to be familiar with each of these cognitive functions. You have to know how they manifest. You have to understand how they manifest very early, right? And so there is some skill that is required, some knowledge around functions that's required to profile a child. But if you are familiar with those functions and you know how they show up and how they develop over time, it becomes easier to determine what your child's dominant or driver process is. And that gives you 3 of their dichotomies. You know, if you know somebody's driver process, you know about 3/4 of the equation. Their co-pilot process, that auxiliary cognitive function, is a lot more difficult to figure out right away, or at least it can be. Because our observation has been that doesn't really start to truly show up, like truly manifest, until later on in their life, since we all have a proclivity and a fondness for the world of our dominant process. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the technical name for this is your attitude, your introverted or extroverted attitude. And the attitude of your driver process, which will either be an introverted or an extroverted cognitive function, that is the world that we have a preference for. So, for example, I'm an ENTP. My driver cognitive function is technically called extroverted intuition. And that means I have a preference for the extroverted world, or my extroverted attitude. And if your driver process is introverted, let's say you're an INFJ, and your dominant function is introverted intuition, or what we call perspectives, that means you're going to have a preference for your introverted world, or the inner world. And our observation has been that children will usually hang out in that world that they prefer to the cost of their co-pilot. And what will often end up happening is they'll just naturally settle into what we call the 10-year-old process, which shares the same introverted or extroverted attitude as their driver process. If this is really technical for you, highly recommend going to personalityhacker.com, put CAR model into the search engine, and you'll get a bigger picture of what this CAR model looks like and how cognitive functions work within type. So our observation, and this is not something that this is not an official position. This is more observation because there's not a lot of study done around this. So this is just sort of where we've landed in our observations about how this works. So I just want to be really clear about that. Our observation has been that since we have such a strong preference for that attitude, we will end up having an interesting relationship between our driver and our 10-year-old process as children that isn't as unhealthy as it would be if you saw the same dynamic showing up in an adult. Now, one of the number one things we recommend people do to to grow and develop as people is to get into their co-pilot process. We reinforce this over and over. Get in your co-pilot, get in your co-pilot. It takes you out of that world that you have a preference for and throws you into the opposite world. And it also balances out whether or not you're leading with a learning or perceiving process, or if you're leading with an evaluative or decision-making, judging process. It helps balance that piece out too. So it's a beautiful balancing act. And one of the reasons why we have to get so much encouragement to get into that co-pilot process is because as children, I think we start out kind of ignoring it because it's in the world that we're not as familiar with. So we just naturally gravitate to that 10-year-old process, which is one of the reasons why I think it grows and develops to 10, right, to a 10-year-old piece. Because around the time period of around 10 or 11, my observation has been we start sort of getting into that co-pilot process now. We start really sort of developing that piece of us, or at least getting interested in components of that piece. So one observation I've made, and this is sort of the picture in my head as I'm talking, is Joel has a son from a previous marriage. And to my great serendipitous, like this is very convenient for me, he happens to be an ENTP. He's 9 years old. He's going on 10. And I'm observing a little ENTP really getting in that exploration driver. Like, it's very clear he's using extroverted intuition. No question about that. And I'm seeing him really struggle with that extroverted feeling or harmony 10-year-old piece because he's always wanting to people please, right? He's always wanting to connect with other people and figure out how to connect with authority figures in his life. And he's very much it almost appears like a harmony person because he's so people pleasy. And I was like, I remember that. I remember being a kid and being all about people pleasing. But now he's about 9 years old and he's just on the cusp of 9, 10. I'm really seeing that introverted thinking or accuracy process start to come out in him. I'm really starting to see him gravitate towards radical honesty. Now, he's always been attracted to it. And he's always been attracted to video games and, things that really activate introverted thinking to some extent. But in life, in how he shows up, in his personality, not just his attraction to, but like really how he's manifesting, I'm seeing him favor accuracy over harmony a lot more. So I'm like, man, your ENTP nature is just really starting to show up. And I also noticed that in Joel, your son Sawyer, who's about 7 going on 8, who's an ESTJ, I'm really starting to see that happen for him too. He's starting to, he leads with extroverted thinking or effectiveness, and I'm really starting to see sort of, he flirts with introverted sensing. He has a lot of safety triggers, but you can tell that he really loves extroverted intuition or exploration too. He's always wanted to make new patterns and go explore with us and have adventures. So that's my observation. My observation has been that you can start to see that driver process real early, which will give you 3 of the Myers-Briggs dichotomy letters. And then around the age of 9 to 11, you're going to start seeing that co-pilot process come up more and more. And my recommendation is, as you see that co-pilot process start to show up during the teen years, keep directing them towards that. Never suppress their driver, right? Because that's what makes us crippled human beings that close in ourselves with crippling depression. So don't do that. So keep focusing or keep recommending things that fuel their driver process to keep them well energized and feeling good about themselves in life. But start to really recommend going down that co-pilot road. Really recommend things that will sharpen the sword of whatever that co-pilot is. And you can start to do that during your teen years because that'll start manifesting in their preteens.
Yeah, if you're listening, one thing you could do is look back at your own life as a child. As you're talking, Antonia, I'm remembering that I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. That means I lead also with exploration. And I remember being about 7 years old, being very much focused on my 10-year-old of effectiveness, which is technically extroverted thinking. Around between the ages of like 6 and 9, I wanted to be a 5-star general in the military. I was obsessed with military strategy. I was obsessed with a lot of effectiveness type thinking, top-down, strategic, organizational type things. And I remember right around the age of 12, my father bought me a darkroom kit, and I got really into photography in my teen years, which was my authenticity process, that co-pilot starting to really kick in. And I remember indulging that co-pilot process right around the age of 12, 13, throughout my teen years. But I can look back right before I was that age and that effectiveness 10-year-old. So I wonder, I'd like to hear some feedback from you listening. Have you had this experience where you had something you were really into between the ages of maybe 6 and 10 that was probably focused around your 10-year-old process, and then in your teen years, maybe around puberty, you kicked into that co-pilot and you saw that come more to the surface for you. I think a really interesting crowdsourcing answer might be here as well for seeing things develop in children and mapping it from ourselves. You were talking about Gunnar, my oldest, accessing that harmony process right now, and he's getting ready to switch into that accuracy process right around 10 years old here. So I wonder if this is something common that we all go through. I don't know. This is a question we have. But I think in general terms, relax. If you're a parent and you're like wanting to find out your child's type, it's going to take some time. If they're like 2 or 3, we have some ideas on Piper, our little girl who's 3. We don't know that to be true. She shows some tendencies toward a certain type that we're like, well, maybe not. Let's hold some more space for her. Let's leave some openings for this not being the case so we don't channel her into something or force her into something that's actually not her. Let's be very responsive, not reactive, but responsive to her as she demonstrates her type as she grows up. I think that's really the important thing as a parent, is to just relax a little bit and know that it's going to come sooner rather than later, and you're going to get there. And I think as you hang around, I know we had a guy go through, he was an ENTJ, he took our profiler training course, like the big deep dive course where it teaches you how to profile people in real time, right? And you can sit down and you can learn how to determine their type and explain it to them and really do this in a profound way. A lot of coaches take this class, and a lot of people that use this professionally will take our big training course. And he went back and actually used it in his business, but he also went and typed his 2 kids. They were like 11 and 12, I think, at the time, or 10 and 12. And it was such a great experience for him because he was able to use some of the stuff that we taught him to improve the family dynamics he had as well. And he understood some of the differences between his 2 boys, his wife. It was a very impactful experience for him. He was taking the course to implement in his business, and he ended up using it in his personal life to the degree where it changed everything for him. It even helped his relationship with his dad because he was able to profile his dad. So hang in there. There are opportunities for you going forward to determine your child's type. And as we keep going, we'll keep creating resources around this type of thing because we know parents are really excited about understanding more about their children. That's a powerful thing to understand your kid's wiring. So that's our answer. What's your feedback? We'd love to hear more from you. You can go over to facebook.com/personalityhacker. You can also go to twitter.com/personalityhack, and you can join the growing community of like minds just like you. And we've got articles, resources, videos, programs available, and you can find out even more about that profiler training I was just mentioning over at personalityhacker.com.
Yeah, I don't mean to turn this into like a massive pitch fest, but I just remembered we actually have a program around this. We have a program called Personalities in Family and Children, or Children and Family.
We probably should pitch more and remember the things that we've created that we have on our website.
I'm like, oh yeah, I think we created a program around this. Anyway, that's available. If you go to personalityhacker.com and look under our programs, you'll find the Personalities in Children and Family. And I think we cover this. We cover a lot about how to type children, how to get to a point where observing their behaviors and helping be responsive to that. And then we also bring in lots of other models, which I think are just as helpful. We talk about the 4-circuit model, which is when our minds open up to different time periods of imprinting, and how that could be just as powerful a piece of information for you to have as personality typology. We talk about systems thinking. We talk about, understanding our family dynamic as a system and what emergent we want. We talk about creating family mantras and crests. And we really focus around optimizing our understanding of models and maps into the family dynamic. So if that's interesting to you, go check it out. If that's, if this answer is what you were looking for, then awesome. But I felt like it would be remiss of me to not mention, hey, I think we have a program around this. So go check out the program if that's what's interesting to you.
There's an app for that. Thank you so much for the question, Aylin. And we would love to get more questions from you if you're listening. Personalityhacker.com/questions is how you can give us questions here for this PHQ show. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thanks so much for being a part of Personality Hackers Questions from the Community. We'll talk to you next time.